So, 50 años. Muchísimas felicidades. It is your golden year. You're starting your 6th decade. Really important time point. And when I think of birthdays, I always think about looking back and looking forward. So let's take a second and look back. Now that would be 1972. Many of you are probably not even born yet. So there were Maxis and Minis. Grease just opened on Broadway. The drinking age was standardized to 21 across the country. No more 18-year-olds. Watergate broke out in June, and the last soldiers pulled out of Vietnam on August 11th, 1972. How much did gas cost? 36 cents a gallon. Very good, very good. So times were kind of different, huh? Now, what was it like in the medical professions? In 1972, we weren't even counted. We matriculated, we were there, but we weren't even counted. The first year where we were counted was 1973. And at that time, we were 1.4% of the matriculants. So maybe there are 100 people in this room. So maybe one Latino. In 2014, the most recent year, 9%. A lot of progress, but is that enough? No. So we are more than 60 million in the US, about 20% of the population. So progress, but progress still ahead. How about practicing in medicine? 2018, about 6%, under 6%, 60% of which were men, are men. Latinas in medicine, just over 2%. So if you imagine this room, if it's about 100, and I think we do have at least 2 women docs, I think there are more than that, but kind of rare. So again, more progress is needed. So where are we heading? What's the road ahead look like? What might 2072 look like? Can we even predict that far? Because if we only look at 2030, we see shortages in physicians are anticipated, and that these shortages are likely to impact our communities at a greater rate. So, and part of that is because we're getting older. So if we think, what can we control? What can we project? And what are our goals? And if our primary goal is to meet the healthcare needs of our communities, then we need to think of what sort of support we need. We need to support the pipeline, and maybe we don't even need to think of it as a pipeline. Maybe we need to think of it as tributaries so that people can come in at multiple points. This is not a straight line path. We need to think about mentorship, culturally appropriate mentorship, and not just when you're beginning, but at every step of the way. We need a very strong red de apoyo. And I think as I look at some of my senior physician colleagues, we need as much support as everyone else. So really along the entire career path. And we need to foster equity in the profession, foster equity in care, foster equity in healthcare delivery. We need to address implicit and explicit bias. We're not just worried about implicit bias, and we need to address structural racism as it exists within our medical institutions. So when we look back, when we meet, or those of you who are here meet in the next 50 years, how will you know that you've succeeded? How will we know that we've succeeded? Because we've made a difference. Because our communities will be healthier, but not just our communities, all communities. So Jefferson Sidney Kimmel Medical College is incredibly, incredibly proud and honored to be with you. And adelante juntos. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those kind words. Can everyone hear me well? Okay. Let me see. It's a little bit of reverb. How do I do that? Okay. Does that work? All right, awesome. Next, I have the great, really honor and privilege to introduce a person that's really close to my heart. That is Dr. Iris Reyes. If you don't know who that is, Dr. Iris Reyes is a great component of this conference, and you're sitting here, a big chunk of you are sitting here because of her, okay? She has been an amazing mentor for me, for multiple Penn Medical students. And I would say, I think Stephen, Malik, and David agree that she's not only been a mentor, but she's also been sort of like a mother figure to all of us. And we appreciate that a lot about Dr. Reyes. On the more clinical and professional side, Dr. Reyes is a board certified emergency medicine physician, has been working for several years. She's been on the Penn Health system since 1989. And within the Penn Health system, she's been, I would say, the most accomplished Latina ever. She has been an advisory dean. She has worked in admissions. She was an LMSC advisor for multiple years. She created Cracking the Clerkships, a seminar series that helps minority students go through rotations. She created the Alliance of Minority Physicians, an organization that has effectively doubled the amount, doubled the amount of fellows, residents, and faculty on the Penn Health system that are minorities. She is by far the most accomplished and influential, not only Latina, but just Latinx member of the Penn Health system. And I would be remiss if I don't say that Dr. Reyes was with us making this conference every Thursday, every meeting from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. If I ask any of you to be on a meeting on a Thursday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., you will say no, okay? And if you're an emergency medicine doctor, you will definitely say no. But she was there, and she was getting meetings with all the deans of the other medical schools. She was fundamental in convincing the schools to donating the amount of money that they needed to donate to make this happen. And it would be not fair to recognize her efforts. I know you don't like the spotlight too much, Dr. Reyes, but it would be unfair to not mention these things. Thank you so much for what you've done, and please welcome Dr. Reyes to the podium.
Thank you, Mal. I come here basically, first of all, we tripled the percentage of minority residents. Thank you. So yeah, we went from 2012, there were 8% minority residents and fellows at Penn Medicine, and this past year we were up to 24%. And so come to Penn. So I'm here as a representative of the Perelman School of Medicine. They asked me to do this portion. I am PowerPoint averse, so It just would have taken me hours to get something together, but I'm much better at just putting the information out there. I'm representing Dean Larry Jameson. He's also the Executive Vice President of the Health System. Susie Rose, who's our Senior Vice Dean for Medical Education. Dr. Horace DeLisser, who's the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the School of Medicine. As Mel mentioned, I was in those initial meetings where we were looking to fund this conference. And LMSA leadership approached me and said, you're a Penn, can you help us out with this? And then there was those initial meetings with the vice deans from the medical schools here in Philadelphia. And it was, I have to say that I learned a lot about the process, but they stepped up. There were 4 host institutions, Penn, Drexel, Temple, and blanking. Jefferson, thank you. It's like right here. And then PCOM gave us a platinum sponsorship. So we're incredibly grateful for the support that these vice deans gave us. This is coming out after a pandemic where all we heard was like our institutions lost money, but it was quite clear that they needed to know that this was important. It was important for Latino medical students. It was important for those that followed. It was important for Latino residents, fellows, faculty. We needed to make it clear to them that they needed to invest in our population and in our future, and they did. They stepped up. So I'm really delighted that happened. The other thing that came out of those initial meetings is that the vice deans said to me, well, all right, then you be our representative and you make sure that they're spending our money, correctly. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So essentially, those became those Thursday night meetings where I was there basically just, I basically just sat and listened to it and was in awe of all the things that they came up with. And every so often I would say, well, you may want to do this way or that way. But for the most part, I just really sat and listened and was just in awe of all that they were able to accomplish. But another really cool thing came out of that is that now these vice deans for diversity in our 5 medical schools are meeting regularly. They're meeting every month. And what's come out of that is what will be the legacy of one of the legacies of this meeting is that they're now starting to talk about other things, pipeline, recruitment, feeding the pipeline, sustaining the pipeline. And so these are 5 medical school vice deans of diversity that really are now working together for future Latino and Black medical students so that we can continue to increase those really kind of sobering numbers that were presented earlier. So I have to say, like, I have applause to the process because not only have we had a phenomenal conference, but really there's something that's sustainable that's going to happen as a result of that. I'll be talking a little bit at Gala about the Alliance of Minority Physicians, but I wanted just to talk a little bit about here because I'm not sure everybody's going to be at Gala, but 10 years ago, I decided that it really was about time that our residents and fellows of color, it was time that they needed a community, a family of support, and it just wasn't there. When I was a resident, I was it. I was the only minority person in my entire residency program. When I was a fellow, it was the same thing. And it just, I don't know, kind of dawned on me that I was in a position, having worked at the medical school, having worked for administration, having worked for my department, that I had, and at that point I was 20 years or so into Penn, career at Penn, that I knew enough people where I could make this happen. And so I pitched it, I went straight to the top. I pitched it to the president of the university, Amy Gutman, who is now the ambassador to Germany and now has her hands full. But I pitched it to her and she said, look, diversity is our jam right now, essentially. Talk to the dean. And I went to talk to the dean and the dean said, absolutely, let me know how much money you need. And then I applied for grants and got money, but it evolved. And over the 10 years, it's an organization that's thriving. We have over 400 members. And again, that's from medical students to faculty with the focus specifically on our residents and fellows, our trainees that for the most part are left isolated. I remember that before I started AMP, I was sitting with an ortho resident who had graduated from Howard Medical School. And it dawned on me, West Philadelphia is a predominantly Black population. And it kind of dawned on me that he was the only Black resident in ortho. I mean, and had been probably the first in a long time. There was a faculty member in ortho who's Black, but I said to him, like, what does it feel like to be coming from a place where your color really is irrelevant, right, at Howard, to a place where you're it, And so he said to me, and this is just really hard. It's really hard. They think I work for environmental services. They think I'm a transporter. Here's an orthopedic surgeon in the making. And I said, I thought to myself, I have to do this. I can't let him die this slow death. And so again, we create a visiting clerkship program. So please look out for those. We went from 1 in 2012 to 17 programs in our hospital are now participating. So for those that are going to our 4th year, look at our summer visiting clerkship programs. We got our chairs to sponsor them. So they're up to $1,500 for travel and living expenses. If you get into our programs, you get to a meeting with the program directors so that at least you have an in, they get to know you, you get to know our programs. I have to say in the 10 years that we've started this, we have drawn from those visiting clerkship programs into our residencies. The very first year that plastic surgery did theirs, they had 3 spots. And again, plastic surgery was Lily White. I mean, it was like who your dad golfed with was how you made the connection to getting into plastic surgery. And that very first year we had an African-American woman from Einstein, New York, who they absolutely fell in love with. They ranked her to match. And now she's like, she's almost done with her residency. So again, because they got to know her, and she got to know them. So it's working, it's thriving, and we're up to 17. So we're doing a lot mentoring. We have mentoring families. I can go on and on about the things we do for AMP, but again, those of you that are not from Philly, welcome to Philadelphia. Welcome to the Logan, and please consider our institutions. I want to say come to Penn, but I have to say come to our institutions because we very much are invested in your future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reyes. Let me just advance these. All right, everyone, that's my picture up there. It is my distinctive honor to introduce our closing keynote speaker for this weekend's conference, Dr. Ana Nunez. Give it up. Now, it will be impossible for me to give her a fair introduction because I would take the entire time that we've slotted for her to speak. And I think you want to hear her a little more than me. So I will just hit some of the highlights. Dr. Nunez is currently a professor of general internal medicine and vice dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Minnesota Medical School. In her role as vice dean, she collaborates with faculty, staff, and students across the school, as well as community partners to address issues of inequities, bias, and discrimination in clinical programs. She's also been named as an integration strategist, a new leadership position within the Clinical and Translational Science Institute at University of Minnesota. Prior to joining University of Minnesota, she was right here in Philadelphia, where she spent 4 years at Drexel College of Medicine. So thank you, Drexel. And she also served as the director for Drexel's nationally designated Center for Excellence in Women's Health. I really will not take any more time than that. I would like to introduce, please give a big round of applause to Dr. Ana Nunez.
All righty. Hey, Philadelphia, you're in the house. Okay, very exciting. What I want to do before we get into things, though, is a few things. First, I want all of you to stand up. Now, do we have people on the virtual thing too? Okay, virtual people, you have to stand up too, okay? They're standing up, you have to do, okay? I want you, front rows, if you can't see everybody, I want you to turn around. I want everybody to see as many people as you can. All right, look at the people. Maybe you were, in your 12 minutes of sleep over the past few days networking, haven't met them yet, okay? But look at these folks. These are your peers. These are your peeps. These are the folks that you're going to work together to make a difference. And I want you to give them a big round of applause. And now harder, I want you to give yourself a big round of applause. All right. So big stretch, sit down. And all the folks that are in this room who made this spectacular thing happen, you stand back up. Stand back up. Stand back up. Come on, everybody, come on. All right. You know it's awesome when hard things look easy. And these folks did wonderful stuff making hard things look easy. Now, the other thing I wanted to try to do, you guys are going to help me, right? We're going to do like a selfie thing here. Now, you promised you're going to help, right? Are we going to do a little reverse selfie thing? Do we have, aha, yes, our tallest member, yes. He was recruited to do as such. All right. You're holding it, man. You're going to be right there. Okay. All right. Say, sí se puede. Excellent. Thank you. All right. So you see in my front slide, there's a few of my friends, right? Our pediatric surgeon, one of 23 in the country, Dr. Sandoval Garcia at the University of Minnesota, my dear friend, Dr. Rios, who I know when we were like 5 years old together. And same goes with Dr. Facunda. We have many folks here. And on many of those folks' shoulder, you will rise and touch the stars. You will. So my intention, what was asked, is to share a little bit of my journey, my perspective, advice, and give you a charge for the future. So LMSA at 50, a bit about me, you, and structural transformation that medicine and science needs, some actionable ideas and thoughts, and summary. So I'll tell you a few things. First is caveats. Coming from Philly, my folks met in New York. I talk really fast, so strap in. Okay, it might be the end, but we're going to go fast. I assume all of you wonderful folks can read, so I have no need to read my slides for you. So you can do that as we sort of go along, all right? And I do think it's being taped, and so if you want to watch it again and slow it down, you're welcome to. Okay, all right. So as we talk about LMSA at 50, let's just take a little backspitch to the fact that Latinos, Hispanics, whatever we're going to call the collective us, have actually been in the medicine and science business for a really long time. Have you learned that in the history of medicine course? No. History needs to reflect the us that is here, as well as the successes that you will achieve in terms of moving it forward. Otherwise, it's just a piece of and a perspective of history, but not a collective representation of who we are. So there have been folks that have been doing work for a long time. Now, I'm going to give you about me and my journey. All right. So, you know, it's pretty funny. When I was at an early age, sort of invited to the dean's office, you know, I'd get interviewed and they'd say, we'd want you to talk to you like, what was it like growing up in the barrio? And I'm like, I'm from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And they would laugh. See, some of these people have been to Altoona, Pennsylvania. Okay. But seriously, my dad was born in Ponce, my mom in Spain. They met in New York. After my first two sisters were born, they decided that that wasn't the space, the vibe that they wanted. So they went to the middle of nowhere, which is another name for Altoona, Pennsylvania. For those of you, you know, Eddie Izzard said, if you want to confuse anybody in the US, ask them two questions, one history, one geography. US people don't know either. So being that Philadelphia's here, Pittsburgh's there, and a little bit left center, that's Altoona. Okay, in sort of the state that's kind of Pennsylvania, but beautiful place, lots of grass and trees. It's true. That gentleman up there in the little corner, he's actually my dad's dad. He was in the insular government of Puerto Rico at the time whenever Puerto Ricans were actually given citizenship. And so, you know, I didn't have a chance to meet him when he was alive, but certainly looks like a very austere fellow. And unlike everybody in my family, he was about 6'3". The tall fellow in the front picture here, that's my brother-in-law, in case you wondered where that tall dude is. And I'm the little kid there. Okay. All right. So originally 5 on the family, 17 years between the oldest and the youngest. Pretty conservative family. My dad was a draftsman, my mom a medical assistant. There was sort of a belief of what girls and boys should do in terms of growing up. And so when I started doing well in school and science, and I said, I want to be a doctor. And they're like, great, you can't, because doctors are men. But maybe you could be a nurse. And I'm like, don't want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. I'm like, yeah. When my oldest sister, her daughter, who was 6 years younger than me, decided that she wanted to be a dentist at the Thanksgiving table, Then suddenly, maybe I could go into sciences, maybe, right? In terms of a tipping point of sort of the possibility of a career in terms of medicine. Back in the days, this is days of dragons, there wasn't the internet. So I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do with college, the whole advising thing, not so much. And so I decided that the best way to go to a college, and it was a big deal that unlike my brothers, I didn't want to go to Penn State, 45 minutes away from my house. I wanted to go to a liberal arts private school. And since I was the spoiled baby of the family, I was allowed to. And I got lots of loans and scholarships. But so I decided that the best way to sort of do this is actually get a school that was affiliated with a medical school, because they probably were able to train you well and they had the connections. So I went to a small liberal arts school in the northeast part of the state, Wilkes College, went there. In the many shades of gray of self-punishment that were sort of familiar in the past, I decided to be a chem major because bio was too easy, because, you know, getting a good GPA wasn't like a thing for medical school. But I was a glutton for punishment and did well as a chem major. And as I went there, got very involved. I was involved in student government and lots of advocacy related things. At that point in history, doing community engagement, doing sort of things in terms of student government was frowned upon. True believers in medicine attached themselves to their chairs. We're a little bit on the spectrum. We're unsociable nerds. I was a sociable nerd. I wasn't sort of the type that sort of would go to medical school. So as I went to I took my MCATs, I did well. I was getting these things from prestigious places. I didn't know what to do. Because again, my parents didn't know and I didn't know. So I did what everybody did. You go into your pre-health advisor and say, look. And my pre-health advisor said, throw them away. What? You'll never get in. Throw them away. You don't have the material to go to medical school. I was like, okay. Conservative hierarchical family, male figure says no, you have to listen to him. Right? No, like not going to. I talked to the gal I was working for Project Upward Bound that helps kids transition into terms of school. That forsaged my interest in terms of education, I think. And so I talked to the ED and she was a lawyer and she said, well, you know, in high school you did speech league and you did debate and ex-temp and you talk a lot and you're in student government, maybe you should go to law school. And I'm like, Brown versus the fence. Human body, yeah. Okay, I want to do that. So I ignored him and applied and got into 4 schools. Now, one of those schools, it was quite interesting. So I'll tell you, go back to Altoona for a minute. For a really long time, maybe like 10 years ago, I suddenly realized that my first language of comprehension was actually Spanish, right? Because that was the language that I was bathed in. I heard, I understood. That's why if I go to a Spanish-speaking country, the words just click in, okay? When I spoke Spanish at home, my parents would say, oh, how cute your accent, and I wouldn't speak Spanish. And I never had any grammatical training or whatever. So I'm really masterful in Spanglish. La bound, give me a can of beans. Okay, I'm really good at that. And when I do go to different countries, they're like, you're not from here. Your accent's different. I'm like, thanks. Okay. But you know, patients are okay. They appreciate it. But my first language of comprehension was sort of Spanish. And when we talk about us in this together, it includes folks like me in this. And I'll tell you, in one of my interviews for medical school, and again, for pre-meds that are thinking about it, don't worry, it was a long time ago. This will probably not happen to you. But I went into the interview, and for HIPAA purposes, I'm not saying what school it is. And I started the interview, and the interviewer, about 5 minutes, not even, 2 minutes in, said, ¿Puedo hablar en español? And I was like, sí. So I tried, and as I was talking, the laws and the L's and the lows, and I was like getting it all wrong. They were correcting my grammar, and I was getting more and more tongue-tied. And finally I said, ¿Puedo hablar en español? Or in English. And she went, sí. And although the interview continued for minutes thereafter, the interview was over, right? In terms of doing that. So it was probably a good idea that they didn't want me and it wasn't a good fit. but nonetheless, sort of life has options. Anyway, so I did sort of choose Hahnemann in terms of going to it. One of you had sort of a poster talking about kids going in higher education who wanted to be geographically close to family. And so being close in Pennsylvania to my parents and so on and so forth was important. And one of the reasons, as well as scholarships, in terms of sort of choosing there for an education. When I came to medical school, I knew nothing. I didn't know what I didn't know. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, thought it was cool, brain's cool, right? But you know, I really didn't know. And so I went in sort of and learned about sort of medicine. As I went through, I sort of said to myself, this could be better. How we do this could be better. So sort of being, you know, wanting to build a better mousetrap and sort of figure it out. It's like, you know, well, you can either stay inside and figure it out, or you could run for the hills. And so again, that glutton for punishment, I stayed. I chose, as I went through my training in terms of the options that were sort of availed to me, that actually I sort of like surgery and medicine. And that seems kind of weird, but actually in some ways I think it's not. And I decided that and this is sort of the advice in terms of your future career, you have to do what you can't not do. That means if you can't live not being a pediatrician, if you can't live not being an emergency medicine doctor, if you can't live being an oncologist, if you can't live being a general internist, right? That's what you need to do. That's how you decide, okay? And so I found I liked everything. And I had role models who were brilliant diagnosticians, amazing educators. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I was selected as chief resident in internal medicine and sort of ready to do sort of a faculty career. And as I was working the residency program, I noticed one of my colleagues, man that I worked with, got invited to do a medical education fellowship. So I went up to my chair as sort of a new faculty and I said, I want to do what he's doing. And he said, oh, I didn't really think he was scholarly. I think I'm doing here. Okay. I said, I am. Can I? He said, yes. Okay. So I did a medical education fellowship. Which was awesome. Michigan State, go Sparty. Okay, it was wonderful. And then at the end of that, realized in the toolkit of stuff that I needed to put in, I knew how to do medical education. I knew how it worked into the hood, but the currency of the kingdom is grants. Didn't know how to do grants. So I had an opportunity and I sort of competed to sort of a slot. And at that point in time, the AAMC had a Minority Health Services Research Fellowship. And so I applied for that and I was sort of very fortunate to be one of the folks within that cohort. I was exposed to, remember chem major, right? Quantitative is us. I was exposed to qualitative methodology, community-based participatory research, mixed methodology, really cool stuff. You know, dopamine squirt in the brain. It was really good. It dealt with the how and why, not just the how much for me, and sort of helped shape sort of my career. That particular training program finished with you doing an NIH submission for which you had to sit at the study where they live eviscerated you. It was so nice. Okay, a little painful. Don't recommend it. After that experience, I also wanted to know where the money came from. And so I competed again and was able to get an HHS policy fellowship, which was fascinating in the show me the money thing. It was very cool. It was actually at a time where around the Beltway, people across the aisle could work forward, do the people's work and move things forward for health. Looking forward to that happening again. Okay. During med school, I met my wonderful spouse of 36 years. So let's hear it for like support and amazing people in your life. Dr. Foster. You can't get it done without sort of those folks. Did research in terms of our Philadelphia UGM initiative of the Center of Excellence that was mentioned, became inaugural editor, Health Equity, and did work in those sociocultural determinants that Dr. Perez was talking about, and then moved to be the inaugural vice dean for diversity, equity, inclusion at the University of Minnesota's Medical School. For those of you in terms of that whole structure, thank you. For those of you in the whole structure of how things go, president of health sciences and dean is like the dude. 80% of the time it's a guy, because we don't have 30% representation of women in senior leadership yet. But then the second in commands are vice deans who would tend to huge aspects in terms of sort of the mission. And so being sort of vice dean in terms of tens of thousands of people, as well as sort of the mission in terms of research, education, clinical care, and sort of changing structures to be more equitable, is a really big honor and a really big job, which keeps me very busy. But sort of if you had asked that kid in Altoona, Pennsylvania, whether she was going to grow up to become a vice dean of sort of an R1 university, it'd be like, what are you smoking? Okay. But things can happen in terms of sort of getting there. We are all diverse. We are all complicated. It's important for us to value all those elements. It's also important for us to prevent playing oppression Olympics. Whose is bigger? Mine is worse. Yours is better. Where are we in? Where are we out? That divisiveness amongst us doesn't do us help. We have to figure out how we join in terms of the common purpose. The more divided, the more we don't move forward. There's lots of literature about the data about why diversity actually helps in terms of more papers, more grants, better care for patients. There's a lot of stuff, but we need to sort of move that into medicine. I'll mention you the difference between equal and equitable. Equal is everybody gets a lollipop. Go to the dentist, they give you a lollipop because it gives you cavities and then you come back. But everybody gets a lollipop, so it's equal. All right. Equitable is a different game. Equitable actually first is you say, what's the point? So imagine I have 3 children. There's one child, able-bodied, one with a femur cast, and one in a wheelchair. And we have a race. The question is, what's the point? What's the end game? Is the question who gets across the finish line quickest? Because if it is, we don't have to run the race. We already know. If the question is, how do we get all children across the line? That's equity. So we live in an environment where there are real sociocultural disadvantages in our communities, and smart, brilliant people like you get into medicine and they say they shouldn't get extra help. They shouldn't be treated special. It's like, they're not. They're being given what they need to succeed. Nobody turns to somebody hyper-advantaged to say, hey, we should take some stuff off of you. Okay, right? So we have to sort of have that conversation, because sometimes the things that we need to be successful is sort of viewed like, well, you're saying they're special need. No, I'm saying disadvantages are a real thing. Right? And if somebody's under-resourced, we need to bring it so that they can succeed. Because we need plastic surgeons, we need orthopods, we need all of you. So the transformation we need to make in medicine and science is to move from trauma-imbued spaces to trauma-informed ones, ones that do all these things here in terms of that common purpose, the sense of belonging. We're going to be releasing with colleagues from the Center for Arts and Medicine, a TPT, which is an NPR PBS kind of sort of video documentary that's coming out in April. It's called Race in Medicine. It's going to be available on, your PBS channel, that kind of stuff, that has physicians sort of talking about sort of race in medicine. One of those vignettes is a woman who talks about that pause. And when I watched this video, I was like, I know this pause. And the pause is you walk in the room and you say, hi, I'm Dr. Nunez, I'm your doctor. And there's a pause. Like, you're my doctor? You go into the room and it's like, here you are. And you're like, you're the person doing this? There's the pause, okay? You have felt the pause. You will feel the pause, okay? But the answer is, yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm who's here. And aren't you lucky, right? Recognize when we hear about some of the, yes, absolutely. When we talk about the imposter syndrome, which I sort of had, I was highly infected with a high viral load of imposter syndrome when I went to medical school. Okay, right? But here's my thing with the imposter syndrome. I think it's hooey. Okay, now here, imposter syndrome infects women more than men, underrepresented minorities versus hyper-advantaged. It infests first generation, refugees, immigrants. Okay, that's a lot of people. So is it really the person's issue in terms of imposter syndrome, or is it a toxic place that says this is a clubhouse that we're going to keep telling you you don't belong? It's the problem with the system. It's not the problem with us. That's really important to know. So when we talk about disrupting structures and the structural incompetence in terms of not having space for us, that's some of the stuff we're talking about changing. At our medical school, in terms of DEI work, we say it's everybody's job, not a minority tax, not a gender tax. You have to be sort of a good citizen. If you do quality and hand washing and don't sexually harass, thank you very much. You should also do DEI because that's about inclusive excellence. Everybody does it, not a few. It is tethered to mission. You're not going to medical school to be a DEI expert. You're going to medical school to be an awesome clinician, to be a researcher and investigator, to be able to sort of deliver wonderful care and generate innovative curriculum. That's why you're here. And you being at the table and being heard is part of the solution for excellence. This is work we all have to do, all of us. And we need to create environments that are about learning and growth, not punitive ones, because we have plenty of those. The work's deep. It isn't just the superficial stuff. And it does take courageous leadership to do that. And so it's important to sort of be able to bring your A game in terms of sort of doing that. You know, there's a picture in terms of structural incompetence. There's a picture of, this is a travelator. You know, I just was like, it's like that doohickey that you get on in the airport, right? But it has a name, it's travelator. And there's this picture of this poor lady who's just gotten off of an international flight. And she has all this luggage and she gets off and on the wrong one. And you see her walking on the travelator and she gets tired. And then she starts going again because she's so tired from traveling for so many hours and she keeps going backwards, right? The structural incompetence that we have in academic medical centers is like that for us. We need to change the structures. It's important. Bias exists. If you have a pulse, you have bias, all right? Bias is about us seeing who we are, not seeing who you are. So being able to be aware and sort of look at your blinders is really important. Knowing that good intentions are lovely, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good intentions isn't the same as actual outcomes. There has to be awareness in terms of making a difference. This picture here, and I'm throwing a little shade, sorry. Previous folks add sort of allopathically speaking, the AAMC. AAMC is about 164 medical schools across the country. It's supposed to be representing all of the diversity of those schools, of which we know that there is at least female majority in terms of sort of membership, as well as the diversity therein. This is a picture of this representation. Good intentions isn't enough to get the job done, okay? All right. The golden rule needs an assumption. We are not all 3D printers of each other. I can't give to you what I want because I'm not you. I actually have to have a relationship with you, have a conversation with you, and find out what you want and give that, right? So we can't just sort of do to others as we do to them. We have to change it a little bit with some editing. Being human and being kind. A colleague recently said to me, oh my God, I made this really big mistake. I wrote the wrong check. I'm a terrible person. And I'm like, whew, whew. You know, welcome to being human. We do the best we can. We are flawed creatures, right? People say, ooh, EMRs are great. They're terrible. It's like, they'll never be perfect because humans are attached. We are flawed creatures. We have to accept that we are and be kind that others are. Kindness and gratitude we don't have an excess of that in terms of academic medicine. We need more. And so that kindness and compassion in terms of making part of that practice is really important. We have to pay attention in terms of the gender continuum and recognize sort of the diversity that we have within that space. Dr. Reyes talked about sort of found families. She set me up and we didn't even talk about it. Right? We need to make room for others. We need to make room for others so that they can connect, that they feel that somebody has their back, that they belong. The best and loudest feminist is a man. Many men I know actually have some interactions with women, birthed by one, related to some, you know, I mean, so one would not think that's a hard thing to sort of get to as being an ally. But in an academic center, sometimes not so much. Okay. So we have to be there for each other and sort of be able to sort of say, we belong. Communication is challenging. The goals and intention are be separate, be together, what you mean, what you meant, what the word said, your verbals, your nonverbals, all these things, affective channel for us. Oh my, right. So it's important that we have sort of our passion, but we also have to have that flexibility of having sort of perhaps robotic constraints to deliver message in a way that's heard. One of my learning paths was, I don't have to tell the whole story and the picture and everything because their eyes glazed over 27 minutes ago. Okay. Get to the point, speak in bullets. All right. So you have to have that flexibility and build those relationships and understand what lens you're wearing. Gender bias is real. This is actually sort of a little cartoon where the one dude says, Tom, can you say what Sally said so we can hear it? And what that's about is that if we don't have 30% of a group, be it women or Latinx folks or whomever, if we don't have them in the room, they don't get heard, which means we have to be allies for each other so they do get heard. Within our community, machismo, marinismo, those are real things, right? In terms of like how you're raised and expectations. And so we have to have a conversation about that in terms of how we can be collaborators and partners and how we can sort of address some of these issues. So again, they don't play in an unconscious way in terms of our relationships. Women in our space have the additional pleasure of being both women and women of color in terms of how they go through the space. So as they're running up the steps, nobody sees they're carrying 150 pounds, whereas sort of a man's just running up the steps. And yet that's a real thing. We have more than 50% women in medicine, and yet we're lucky if we have 15 or 20% leaders in medicine who are women. It isn't because they were busy and forgot to apply. Like they're there, okay? And so we need to have those opportunities in terms of leadership to be able to have all voices at the table. We know that the world writes on the body, and in truth, we collectively create those worlds. So we're actually responsible for how those worlds write on bodies. And Baldwin said, history is not our past, it's our present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. We have a responsibility to know our history, to address sort of challenges, to be able to explore them and be able to potentially heal and move forward. Nobody needs to get into the fact that COVID, as it got peeled back, unpeeled sort of this bigger layer of longstanding sort of racism. It wasn't a newsflash to any of us in terms of old heads. It's sort of a thing. And fortunately, we need to sort of keep the drum beating in terms of making changes in medicine. We know there's lots of work that we need to do. This is just in terms of issues about harassment, 25% put downs or condescending comments. Imagine that, right? Microaggressions are like hitting sort of a beehive and being surrounded by bees. None of those bites kill you, but it's like another bite, another bite, another bite, right? And being able to sort of take those steps in the face of it is wrong. We deserve to have environments that support each other. So what does it take going from sort of that clubhouse to really embracing everybody? It takes that courage. It takes important ways to sort of gather our teams. So some of that for you is developing a mentorship network, okay? Mentor is not your boss. Your boss can be positive towards you, but they have problems in terms of being the mentor. They have other things to pay attention to. You need, like a village, you need lots of people. Okay, you have lots of people, right? I know sort of at least one of you sort of checked with your sort of mentor team, best place to get cheesesteaks in Philly. Okay, right? I mean, so you have mentor teams already. You need to expand that. Where's the best place for a job? Where's the best place to get training? Where's the best place here, right? Develop those mentoring networks because you need a village. And beware, one of my former bosses actually, when I said, I'm doing this thing, my medical education project is on diversity and cultural competence. He's like, yeah, okay. This was like 100 years ago. And he said, oh, this is so important. You need to do this work by yourself. Now, I was too silly as a junior faculty member to not know that this was a kiss of death. And so I said, okay, and continued to do the work. This work takes refining your leadership skills. So become a student about leadership and about yourself. It requires us moving from just belonging to radical belonging. How do we have each other's back? How do we create environments, even if it's trauma imbued, to be more trauma informed? How do we have the courage to take on those structures and to engage? And again, all you need to do in this space is take care of you and take care of each other and be well. And in time, you'll be the head of that ship. You'll be able to move the ship one way or the other. You will get there. You will be our leaders in medicine. You're the reason I can sleep at night. Okay, real work and change is required. If it was easy, everybody would do it. You are doing what is not easy. Congratulations and thank you. But this is the work that you deserve, our patients deserve, and medicine deserves. And so it's important to be slow, to be methodical, and to sort of give yourself a little break and celebrate the progress you make. So being change agents, it's about sort of leadership. It's about educating and reflecting, becoming more self-aware, becoming an ally to others, listening with cultural humility. And I'll tell you, I was thinking about cultural humility today. And it was really fascinating because I personally, total bias, feel that in terms of being Latina, humility is an easy get, like not to be in fancy pants. That's like, that feels culturally sort of resonant. Asserting feels a little weird, right? And that's sort of like being a little pushy, like I walked on the moon. Like that feels hard, in terms of sort of doing that. And yet in medicine, you need to have agency. You need to have confidence. I'm here. I'm your doc. We're going to do this, move forward. So that people are like, okay, let's go, right? But at the same time, you have to have the humility. And one of our physicians here that I met, she goes, one of the things I appreciate is my patients say, you don't really seem like a doctor. That was meant as a compliment to her and not to doctors in general, right? And so, but recognizing you're accessible, you care about me in terms of humility, you'll listen. And so it's important for us to sort of build that type of humility as we move forward and being able to make those transformations. So here's some lessons learned that I wish I'd known or was glad that I knew. Life is messy. Running around trying to tamp out chaos is a fool's errand. So like be able to just like let some of this stuff go. Things are not as they seem, usually not as simple, and it's even more complicated and nuanced even beyond that. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you have the answers, despite how effective you are at convincing yourself about that. Perspective is not something you get up inside your own head. A patient told me this. I said I would quote her for the rest of my life. Why we need our friends and our support people is when we get stressed, we lose perspective, we go down rabbit holes, and we sort of give negative narratives to ourselves, right? And so having perspective, taking some downtime, reading silly novels, getting a little poor baby from a friend, perspective is really important. It's okay. An okay solution that most people buy into is better than a great solution that you have all by yourself. Traditions in medicine go beyond white coat and graduation and infiltrate much of our structures and functions and can be infective. So if you acculturate into medicine, you may lose your soul. Don't lose your soul. They're too precious. They're too important. We need you. So seek out people who are multipliers that connect you. Other lessons, just because it isn't, it might not be there yet. I went to a minority faculty conference many, many years ago. Around the table, there was this wonderful Latinx doc. And I said, I wanted to go in medical education. And he goes, you can't. I can't. He says, it's not a thing. I'm like, it's not a thing. And he's like, no, so you can't. Medical education is things that like retired pathologists and nephrologists do. It's not really a thing. It's not a discipline, right? Since then, it became a thing. So maybe it's not a thing yet, right? So being patient and relentless is a huge requirement in yourself and others in the system. Find people who share the whole sky with you. When people say, I think you can do this, you want them to say, here's everything you can do. Don't have them sort of limit possibilities in terms of those issues and be able to capture all of those. Setting boundaries and limits, having agency, not just being good boys and girls is important. Humility with healthy self-esteem is our secret weapon and a catalyst for change. And breathe, because one of my favorite phrases is logic doesn't live here. Okay, that helps you when you're really frustrated and you're bouncing against something. You're like, well, that doesn't make sense. And you're like, oh, that's right. Logic doesn't live here. Okay, that makes you feel better in terms of moving forward. What you say matters less than how it lands, right? The Pyrrhic victory is you win the battle, but you lose the war. Right? So don't have a Pyrrhic victory of communication. You won the argument, but they'll never talk to you again. So make sure in terms of that. The smartest people in the medicine are the people who say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Joining lots of networks can be value added. Step away from perfectionism. Put down the bat. Lean into reflection and support and action. Do serious work, but don't take yourself too seriously. Know what is under your umbrella, your locus of control, and let the other stuff go. There is no such thing as too healthy or too much support. Verbalize gratitude and success Do it often, all the time, more than you think you should. Know that sometimes opportunities are missed because they look like it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. It's Thomas Edison. Opportunities missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls, look like work. Sometimes just doing work turns into amazing opportunities. So don't shut it down and say, I don't do that, I don't do that. Okay, that may actually be the opportunity that turns into something amazing. The rarest of commodities is time. Investing, provide relevance and context for your learning, stimulate your curiosity and ideas, add in terms of patient connectedness and skills, and do things that work in more than one space. Many of you have posters, right? So then you're going to write them up. That's a twofer. Maybe you'll do additional presentation. That's a threefer, right? So take advantage of that in terms of sort of time. Important to get better in terms of time management and getting stuff done, because sometimes that's what you feel like in terms of running around. And I was asked to mention specifically for students who are pre-med, look for opportunities for exposure in medicine programs, select experiences that'll help you know what life is like in medicine and learn about people, human beings, and expand horizons. Connect with writing resources. Yeah, sure, you should do community engagement, but they actually want you to be able to like do the noun verb thing and sort of say that you can communicate effectively in terms of your application. And then search your name in social media. Herpes is not the only thing that is forever. Social media is too, right? And so recognize, like patient's going to come in and they're waiting for you and they're like, let me look up this doctor. And you're like, what? Like, I'm out of here. Okay. So you can have a good time. Just don't Instagram it. Okay. Find credible resources, learn about things, get out of your bubble, connect, learn about things you don't know, read about divergent opinions and solutions. So my take homes, not just the Latino community, not just patients who look like us, everyone in the United States of America needs you now. Your intelligence, your innovation, your dedication, it's long overdue. We need to sort of make space. Be courageous if you are in a program where you're the first one, all right? But you aren't the first one because we're all here and we're all connected. Real barriers exist that you can break down at every step of your training and moving forward for those who are coming next. We are all human. We do the best we can. We have good days and sometimes not. We need commitment and dedication, but put action, not just words. And then look at your list, your to-do list for skill building. Who else should be on my mentor team? What don't I know that I don't know? Hone your craft to be the best service leader possible and be there for one another. Thank you. Thank you. Aww.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nunez, for that amazing speech. We just want to show a little token of our appreciation from LMSA to you for all your support and everything you did for our conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really sweet. Okay. So any questions? Any questions? Yes, Cassandra.
Coming from Minnesota, right? Coming from rural Minnesota, we rural Latinx providers, because we have no Latinx providers within about 100 miles.
Mhm.
How do we get Latinos from those communities that are really struggling receiving healthcare at all to envision themselves in the role of a healthcare provider? Because we need them to come back.
Mhm.
We need them to go and to feel that they can achieve what they want to do. Because we don't have that. We are having a large disconnect. A large part of our Latinx population is being underserved in Minnesota.
Mhm.
And what can we do?
Sure, that's a great question. If I had the total solution, I'd be a zillionaire, but I'm going to try. Okay, so I'm going to try here. And part of this is, you may not self-perceive that you're the experts and you're the big muckety muck, okay? But in 10 seconds, they're going to say, hey, can you sit on our board of education? Can you help in terms of, the city's council where we're doing X, Y, and Z? Because we want your opinion. Okay. Your advocacy in those spaces are really important because the answer to your question may be, our high schools have to have it that more than 50% of kids who look like us graduate high school. Okay. And when you say, is that medicine? Well, guess what? If they're not coming, it's medicine, right? Because you all will be very lonely because if nobody's coming next, right, who's going to come next? So we have to get into their business, if you will, in terms of saying, what are we doing in education? Maybe advocating in terms of money for public education in our places, which actually is like the obscene T word, taxes. People have to pay taxes so people can go to school, so they can graduate and have high quality education. That doesn't sound really hard, but we're in the environment that's sort of like, no, we don't want to pay any taxes. It's like, there's part of me like, okay, well, so we won't send the fire to your house when it's burning, and we won't send the police when you get burgled because you don't pay any taxes. But so we have to sort of say maybe some unpopular things, but we may have to reach into and get collaborators in terms of education to be able to do that. We need to actually have sort of big conversations about educational indebtedness. It shouldn't be that you break the bank to go to medical school. Right? We need this to happen. I'm thinking like, maybe like 4 Teslas a year gets donated to medical education or something, but there's money out there, but is it sort of given in a way to sort of deal with sort of indebtedness? Again, sort of the colleague who sort of did the work about sort of students in training, they said they didn't want to go far away from home. And we may need to have programs that sort of take you one step, in terms of your educational piece to a community college, and then to the 4-year college, and then to medical school as you build sort of community so that you feel good about it. At the University of Minnesota, we have a rural pathway, as you well know, in sort of our Duluth campus. And what's cool about that is that that's part of the mission. So students who are really interested in rural health come there, and they actually spend a week in a home, in a rural community, working side by side, rural doctors. So they see the reality of everything and then sort of have dinner with them and have conversations and so on and so forth. And so staying connected in terms of those rural spaces are really important and sort of being able to sort of have those resources. But I also think that we need to develop nationally more electives in terms of rural medicine. So people, because, there might be somebody who comes from a small city who's like, this is really cool. I would like to work in that space. I want to sort of deliver this kind of care. But they wouldn't know it if they don't have those opportunities. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but not one sort of easy one yet, but you'll figure that out. Other questions? Yes. He's like throwing you the microphone, like axe throwing.
Yeah, thank you. So that's actually where my question is located or kind of situated, is when I'm so intrigued by your comments around asserting yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
To give you a quick background, I am an individual because of my background and my upbringing where I struggle to assert myself, even though I'm currently an assistant professor of medical education, right? And so with that being said, I would love to know one of two things. Share with us a little bit more about why asserting ourselves, folks such as us who are in this room, is so crucial to our success. Or please share with us a time where you asserted yourself and it led to your own agency, freedom, or transformation.
Great question. Whew, you guys are juiced. Here, I thought it was the end of the day and everybody like, okay, no, you're juiced. Excellent. Okay, great question. All right, so before I sort of get to this, I'm going to tell you a little story. I was visiting in California, sort of in a pre-COVID world, at the very important McDonald's, because I needed to use the bathroom. Okay. And there was this Latina who was, about this tall. Okay. And she was waiting in line because it was a single seater. And I stood behind her waiting, and not picking on anybody based on demographics. This is just what happened. But little blonde 12-year-old girl comes up. And as the person comes out of the single sitter, little blonde girl walks right past the lady who was waiting and started to go in the bathroom. And I went right after her and I said, excuse me, this lady right here was waiting. I assume you didn't see her. And she looked at me like I was going to kill her, pull a knife and that kind of stuff. It was okay. I scared the bejesus out of her. And this other lady looked at me like she was scared, like, what are you doing? We don't do this here. And I went like this and said, like, you're up deck next, right? And she got to go to the bathroom in the timely way that she was, in a respectful way, even if it was forced. So sometimes we have to help each other in terms of agency about sort of doing stuff, hopefully in ways that they want. You know, when you mentioned about sort of agency, what comes to mind, and all existing surgeons or those thinking about surgery, you'll excuse me, but it's a surgery story. I'm an internist. Okay. So in surgery, and this will be a good tip for you who haven't done clinical yet, right? So there's this thing that, you know, like if you get to, you know, if you hold the sort of the thing, the forceps to sort of keep the field open, that's sort of one thing. Once you're able to do that reasonably, then you actually, you know, get to sort of hold it while they're, you know, doing the suture, and then you may get to actually cut the string. Okay, you get to cut the suture. Okay, and this is where the torture of the medical student and resident comes on. And those of you who are experienced clinicians know exactly where I'm going here. All right, because you'll, you know, here's the string and here's the scissors, and you'll cut it. Now, obviously, you don't cut the knot because then you lose the whole work and then they yell at you, right? And then you don't cut it so much that the tail's in the other OR, okay? Like, so, you know, there has to be a balance between that, right? So you try to cut where you think is short enough, and every time you cut, they say too short. And you cut it exactly the same the next time, and they say too long. And then the next time they say too short. Okay, so I noticed this, and I decided, because this is like little baby agency here. Okay, so I'm in the OR. The surgeon, like, he's in a rant in terms of like torturing people, and so he says, "Okay, you're allowed to sort of cut." I'm like, "Oh." So I went, and I said, "Tell me when to stop." And when he said stop, I cut, and he couldn't say too short or too long. Because he told me when to stop. So it's important in terms of, you know, I mean, I'm on a national forum. There's a thing called MANLS. How many people here have heard of MANLS? MANLS. Okay, 4 people. Okay. The outgoing director of the NIH, Francis Collins, stopped going to national meetings, including ones that were actually specifically about women's health, that only had men on the panel. Hence MANLS. Okay. And most of the men on these panels were totally confused. What's the problem? We just got the best people in the world to be on the panel, and they just all happen to be X, Y. So I've sort of been on sort of panels, and sort of, you know, like one I remember, I did a presentation. There were these 2 guys, me, right? And these guys were just, you know, they walked on the moon. It was, you know, they knew everything. What a burden. Okay. And so they were sort of there. And so we finished the presentation, and I was the last one and the strongest speaker. And both guys are like, "Wow, you're a good speaker." I'm like, "Yeah, thanks. You know, thanks for the comment, lose the incredulity." You know, but sometimes in terms of that stepping up, you know, you have to sort of be out there and just sort of put it out there and sort of do a reframe. You know, you need to sort of bring that, because there's sort of, and the other piece I'll tell you goes back to actually time management, right? Oftentimes we tend to be overcommitted. There's zillions of things happening, okay? Trick I learned, sort of hyper advantaged men schedule 1-hour meetings, but only let them run for about 35 minutes. So that they can finish doing their work and be on time to the next meeting. Minority colleagues like me sort of have the hour-long meeting that really goes for 1 hour and 5 minutes, and you're rushing together, and then you're late to the next meeting, and you look all kerflustered because you're running late to the next meeting. Okay, so learn from what they do in terms of sort of saying, let's sort of curtail this so that we can kind of find the time. Understand that you have to be able to say yes and no, or maybe not now, because the immensity of needs out there, we need you for this, we need you this, we need you for everything. Okay, right? And you're like, yes, okay, I'll do it all. Right, I don't need to sleep ever. Okay. You need to sleep. Okay. So, but the reality of it is, you can say, I love this. No, not now. Okay. Or let me see if I can have somebody else sort of help. No, don't dump on others, but you know, I mean, there might be ways in terms of doing that, but you have to be able to set those limits in terms of doing that's sort of part of agency. You know, I hope in my lifetime I get rid of that pause thing that my friend was talking about. Oh, that wasn't what I expected. You know, but still you play the game, and obviously I use humor. It's like, yes, aren't you lucky you got me? You know, I'll pretend. You know, I had a colleague when we increased the number of underrepresented students in sort of our medical school class, and I said, yes, we have a bigger class of our DPMS students. And this colleague was like, really? And I'm like, yes, isn't it wonderful? I'm like, I'll just pretend that you're happy about it like I am. And we'll just go from there, right? And so being able to sort of do that, added with having someone in your life that gives you poor baby, colleagues that can vent spleens in nice ways, right? And what I mean nice ways is you can't say, I had a really hard day. I'm like, oh, you had a hard day. Let me tell you about my day. Like, no, this isn't, you know, the Olympics, right? It's like you get to, and then later on, I'll do for you kind of thing, right? But we need to sort of do that self-care, but it's important. And so it's always a work in progress. I hope that answered your question. All right. Please.
Yes. Is this on? Okay, great presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, we want to work on ourselves as the next generation, but we also want to teach the next generation. First question is, do we do that at your stage of your career, or do we start now at my stage as an MS2? And the second one is, how do we teach ourselves and the next generation that difference does not have to be tied in with a superior inferior complex that's rampant throughout society?
Yeah.
So if you could offer your thoughts.
Okay, only easy questions. Man, I thought you'd like bring it, you know? Okay. Recognize the most important things for you right now is your day job. Doing well in school, kicking butt, learning all you can do, having all options open to you so that you can sort of take over the universe. That's priority one. Okay? You know, everything else is gravy. That's priority one. You're working on you in terms of your insight and education and leadership is part of your day job. But you doing somebody else's homework in terms of helping them go through the process, that's their homework. So you can collaborate with and share and sort of be like Buddha and point, but it's not your job necessarily to teach them. You know, it's like, okay, Latinos 101, let me tell you, and speak for all Latinos. Okay. Like, that's not your job. That's not your job. It is their job. But holding people accountable in terms of understanding about each other is really important. To the second point, in terms of the superiority and, you know, difference in the negative, okay? In the social science world, they actually talk about differences in an attribute way, right? If you live in your stoops in North Philadelphia, people say, oh my gosh, they don't have a lovely community center with a golf course, and how do these people connect, right? They're sitting on their stoops and they're chatting with each other and sort of sharing ideas and so on and so forth. Their sense of community might not look like somebody else's, but it's a sense of community. So rather than make it deficit-based, we have to learn about the strengths. Now that's challenging in medicine because we love pathology. Okay, we love gross pictures. You know, like that's what we live for. It's like, ooh, look at that. That's really gross. Okay, so looking at a positive and looking at attributes isn't sort of our normal gaze. And we have to learn in terms of how does the cohesiveness of a culture help? How do we benefit things, right? It's sort of in a women's health space. Men don't have osteoporosis at the same rate as women. So what do we need to know about the science in bone anatomy and physiology so that we can learn about it and prevent osteoporosis in women and tiny people, right? That's a strength-based way. It's not a deficit-based way. And so changing how we do that in terms of looking at where's the strengths and how can we sort of apply it here changes the perspective rather than we have this dominant way and then all are broken or other or deficient, because that's infused in terms of sort of medical training. Dealing with the fable of race in terms of sort of addressing that as sort of the fatal invention that Dorothy Roberts has written about, in terms of sort of recognizing that we have differences in terms of how we live. Yeah. Are people racialized? Yeah. But are we different? We're actually human beings. All different colors, all different heights, sizes, places, that kind of stuff. But maybe that zip code we live in is going to decide mortality more than anything else. And so how do we look in terms of teams? You know, maybe the future is that when you go to medical school, there's going to be an environmental specialist and the nurse and sort of the structural engineer and so on and so forth in terms of how do we build healthy communities so people can actually get on a tram that takes them to the hospital right away, right? And so maybe that's what the future of medicine looks like. Very different than now, very different team when we talk about team science than now, that really sort of looks in a different place. So not being scared about sort of thinking about those possibilities in terms of moving it forward. Not doing a deficit-based, doing it strength-based, not sort of seeing where there's stuff that sort of tends to be sort of the superior, inferior and say, I don't understand. Can you explain this to me? I totally understand. I'm just giving you crap, right? But I'm saying it this way, right? I don't understand. Can you explain why this is a deficit? Because you could also see it this way. And asking those questions as you go through. Then eventually rewriting all the books so that they aren't bad. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful.